Everyone, so we're just waiting on some attendees coming here. We're just going to give it another minute or so for some late arrivals, and then we're going to get into things. Just bear with me. We'll give it another few moments. Hope everyone's excited. All right, I think, yeah, maybe another moment or so. Yeah, okay, I think we're going to get going. Right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Fergus from Locus, and I've got with me today Stuart Harper from Safe Software. And look, we're extremely excited to be able to deliver this webinar to you, which is going to be on how to deploy FME Server into the cloud. Just to kind of set the scene, keep the slides up here. Just to set the scene, this is going to be delivered into two parts. Part number one, I'm going to deliver on a step-by-step process of how to deploy FME Server into AWS. And look, this really is a step-by-step process. It's everything you need to know from building a machine, the configurations associated with building that machine, how we need to configure FME Server. The whole concept behind this is to be able to create a repeatable process so that you guys can follow this and be able to replicate it, get AWS up and running, and be able to deploy FME Server and make sure it's working. I'd like to say hassle-free. That's the goal. And then we're going to pass over to Stuart Harper. He's going to cover off probably a more high-level overview of the different deployment cloud types that are available as part of Azure. So FME Server in Azure. They've got a few different deployment availabilities as part of their marketplace. And look, I think in the interest of keeping things moving smoothly, we'll probably let Stuart do his introduction when it actually comes to his point within the webinar. I think it just makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, formal introduction. So as I mentioned, my name's Darren Fergus. I'm a certified professional in both desktop, server, also certified trainer. And look, I'm a really big advocate for not only FME, but also AWS. I suppose if I was to say two really useful things, I think for either or, would be FME, I guess, gives you the power to be a developer without actually having any program skills. So if you can break down processes or problems into individual components, that's completely transferable into like a workspace with transformers. And you know, the power from that's hugely awesome. And AWS, I suppose, for me, has been a byproduct of working with FME and FME Server. A good example of this is, as a trainer, one of the things I like to be able to do is deliver a consistent and seamless process when it comes to a training environment. So produce a training environment that's the same regardless of where you are or who you are. And what that means is that the AWS allows me to be able to do that. I don't have to deal with different applications, different drivers on different machines, and it means that the trainees get the best experience. It means I get the best experience, and everybody learns from that. So I got my camera on the screen here. Sorry, apologies, 2 seconds. And then Locus. So I've been with Locus now for 2 years, and they've been in, I guess, in this industry now for 10 years. They're present both New Zealand and Australia, and yeah, we're a platinum partner with Safe Software. And one of the things that I love about that is the fact that we're able to do collaborative things like this, like Stuart giving his time and his resources and his expertise to be able to support us to give you something, which is hugely important for us. But yeah, we've got over 350 odd clients now between New Zealand and Australia. And yeah, it's a pretty awesome story. The last 10 years has really seen exponential growth. We've got John Arnerick, who's the director of New Zealand, and Ruby Donaldson, who's the director of Australia. Typically, I would sit between both. Obviously, COVID's impacted that somewhat, but I'm still here as a resource to help out remotely. And yeah, we've also got a team of professionals that are certified professionals, and probably pretty passionate individuals like me that are here to be able to support you to be able to do the things that you need to be able to do. So straight into the agenda, this is what we're going to do by the numbers. We're going to create an AWS instance. We call that EC2. That's basically the technology and the naming convention for a virtual machine. And there's things we're going to have to think about, like what type of instance are we going to select? We're going to have to look at, what are the specifications that we need to set up that match with FME Server, memory, storage, even things like, what region are we going to publish that to and deal with, different IP things. So, static IP, public IP, elastic IP, what do they actually mean and what's the impact for FME Server? And if we've got time, we'll maybe cover off Route 53. It's a DNS web service. That's quite useful, but yeah, we'll cover that off. We've got some time. And then we're going to move into the configuring, installation, and the setting up an FME. Now we're going to make the assumption, I've got a machine that's already set up for this. So we've already got desktop and server installed. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to test it, and we want to understand the things that we've got to change in it to make sure it works. So some of the things that we want to test is, can we access the REST internally? Can we access it externally? And we're going to need to be able to configure the advanced firewall settings, the ports, make sure 7078's open for topics and notifications, and our different ports for IMAP and SMTP. We've actually got an automation there that's built so we can show you it working and we can test it. And I've also got some tools that I've developed to make it easy for you, because we'll supply that as part of this webinar, so that if you get stuck on certain things, you can just run them and it'll work for you. When FME Server deploys, it runs services in the Windows Services app, the administrative database, core, engine, etc. And what we want to do is we want to understand the implications of running that under local system or running that under an administrative account, like folder permissions and all those different types of things. And we're not going to go into too much details. And then after that, hopefully everything's working and everybody's kind of got the principle of what we're doing there. And we're going to have 2 or 3 business cases, some examples. We're going to pass over to Stuart at Safe Software, and he's going to do his bit. And then at the end of that, we'll have time, hopefully, for some questions and answers. I'm not going to cover off the definitions, but this is just the definition is really just a placeholder for you to be able to reference, so you don't have to Google it up, right? But prerequisites, definitely going to cover that off. One of the things you've got to think about is that AWS, you're going to need an account to do this. It's completely free of charge. There's no cost. However, what you do need to bear in mind that whilst there's no cost for an AWS account, there's free services that are available to you, but the one that we're going to do in the machine that we're going to build, it's going to cost you, and you get charged by the hour. It's roughly $1.25 an hour for the machine that we're going to build. But if you turn that off, obviously it reduces the cost, but we'll kind of cover that as we're going along. So we're just going to jump into AWS. So I'm making the assumption you're going to go to AWS and you're going to hit login, and obviously you've registered, you've got an account, and the first thing that you see when you come into AWS is this management console. And like with any other application, whether it be Windows, whether it be your mobile device, there's 2 or 3 ways to do the same thing. Okay, let's just cover them off simply. So top left-hand corner, you've got services. So these are all the different services that's available from AWS. You can see EC2. EC2 is the machine. That's the only thing that we care about for what we're actually looking to do. And here you can see recently visited. You're not going to have that because you might not have used that before. Obviously, if you have, then you'll see some stuff in there. But for me, obviously, I use AWS all the time, so I see a lot of different services in there. And then there's a build the solution at the bottom. So you've got launch a virtual machine, build a web app, and so on. We're just going to make this nice and simple, and we're going to do what we said. We're going to build a virtual machine, which is EC2. And the first thing that we're going to get is what AMI do we want to choose? AMI is short for Amazon Machine Image. So think of that like, I actually think a good example is like Dell and HP, right? They come with an image on their hard drive that includes all the drivers specific to HP or Dell, right? That's exactly what this is, except you have a choice of something like Linux. There's a few different options for Linux. I mean, I'm not really a Linux guy, I'm more Windows. So there's a whole host of different AMIs that you can choose from. Like for me, we're gonna we're going to do a simple deployment of FME Server, and we're going to use Windows Server 2019 base. If you look here, though, you've got one with containers, you've got one with SQL Server 2017, Enterprise, and so on. So you'd pick the one that was appropriate to you. Anyway, let's click this. Okay, so instant type, right? So the first thing you're going to see is a whole host of stuff that might not make sense to you. So we're just going to dial it back a wee bit. And let's ask ourselves the question first. What are the minimum requirements we actually need from a machine? Yeah, so let's look at server. If we're deploying this for the first time, it's going to be a trial license. And with the trial license, that means we're going to get 2 engines. And for each engine, we know as a minimum requirement, we need 2 cores per engine. So we're going to need 4 cores. So we need a machine with 4 cores. And then the other thing is, what's the minimum requirements for memory? Well, we need 8 gigabytes of memory. And they recommend about 30 gigabytes of hard disk storage. I'll cover that off in a second. So I'll make this easy for you. We'll go down virtual CPUs. And here's the first one. So if we were to select the family T2, type T2 extra large, we get 4 CPUs and 16 gigabytes of memory. Just to simplify it, there isn't a machine that does 4 CPUs with 8 gigabytes of memory, so forget it. This might be the one that we go with, but let's just consider this one more moment. If we go down a little bit further, let's find another 4-core, 16 gigabyte machine. You can see this is a T3. So what's the difference between a T2 and a T3? Okay, so consider this. Think about Intel generations of CPUs and AMD generations of CPUs. These are last year's generation, or they're an older generation of CPU. Okay, so they're a little bit cheaper to run. They don't have as great performance, and I suppose that's the main considerations of that. T3's latest generation, and to separate that a little bit further, and look, I'm really not going to bang on too much details because we don't really need to, but there's T3 and T3A. T3A allows you boost capacity. So what that means is if you're requiring more CPU usage and you need a little bit more bandwidth across the CPU, it'll give you 10% boost, and it works on a credit system. And again, don't want to create complexity around it, but if you're not really using the CPU, you build up credits, and then you can spend them when you come to use them for boost. So it's actually one of the most optimal machines that you can do. So for this instance, we're going to go with T3A, and we're going to get 4 and 16. Okay, EBS only means that's the type of storage. It stands for elastic block storage. Typically that's SSD, and it's a virtual SSD, obviously. And most of these other things are not really relevant to what we need to do. You can look them up separately, but these are the key things that we need from a performance perspective on the machine. Go next, configure instance. Right, so from a training perspective, this is really good for me, because see where it says number of instances. So I've got a machine and I can create 10 of them exactly the same. And that means that I can do stuff so much easier because I don't have to manually recreate the same thing. And also, you know, if you're in an enterprise environment and you're lucky enough to have, say, for example, you know, a development environment, a UAT testing environment, and a production environment, and you want them to be exactly the same specification, this is where you do it. You create all the machines exactly the same. Now, most of these settings are just default settings. We don't have to mess around with them. The subnet is probably the important one. So when you create your AWS account, one of the things that will prompt you to do is register to a specific region. You know, Australia has 3 different internal regions associated with it. US is broken up into different regions and so on. For me, I have 3. Once I've registered to the Australian, I think it's Southern Pacific, it might be. When I've registered to that, I have 3 different regions I can choose from. Now, this is important. And this is important for one reason. Let's say I build a machine on 2C, and then I want to add an additional volume to that, maybe an additional storage. If I go and build that on 2A, so I have a volume in 2A and I have a machine on 2C, and I want to put them together, I can't do that, right? So if you have a machine, all the services that you generate, whatever they might be, have to be on the same region. Now, I just have a rule. I pick 2C for everything I do, and that way I don't forget. Auto assign public ID, you need to be able to do this. So IPs Yeah, IPs, you need to be aware with IPs. I'll cover off a couple of things with that when we get to the right time. I don't think it's the right time just to cover that off just yet. But public IP, it needs to be enabled. What that's saying is it allows you to be able to have an IP address that's accessible via any computer around the world. And if you think about our server, we want to be able to access that. Obviously, there's configurations we also need to apply for that to work, but we definitely need a public IP for that. That's it. Once we've done all these things, everything else is just checkbox. Oh, one thing I'll mention on this, I don't use it, but an IAM role is basically, it's Amazon's equivalent of security groups and users for Windows. All right, so it allows you to add a user to your AWS account and give them permissions to access different services. I don't use that. So again, that's something else that you can read up on. So we're just going to go with this. Next, add storage. So 30 gigabytes. So here's the thing. You go and you create your machine and it comes with 30 gigabytes of storage. By the time you download desktop, by the time you download server, you're almost at your full capacity because obviously you've got Windows installed on there, and then you haven't got any room to unzip it. And the thing is, think about unzip. You've got to unzip the files, and then you've got to take those files from an installation perspective, and that installation creates temporary files, right, which fills up space. You just don't have enough room. Really, if you want about 5 gigabytes of storage and you want to be able to download and add everything and get it all installed, you probably want a total of 45 gigabytes minimum. And that's just based on my experience working with the training machines. Usually though, I deploy all my machines with 60 gigabytes minimum, and that's what I go with. But look, say you got to this point and you made 30 gigabytes and you're like, oh, I made the volume, it's only 30 gigabytes. What am I going to do? You can actually go into your console up here. So this is my console. This is where my machines would exist after the fact. I can go into volumes and I can click on one of my volumes like this one here. I can go action. Oops, hold on. It's pinged away on me. I can click on this, go actions, and I can go modify volume, and I can go and tell it whatever it wants to be. I make it 60 megabytes, gigabytes, not 60 megabytes. Make it 60 gigabytes, and then I just go on the machine and I allocate that additional volume to the drive. Job done. Real simple. And again, I'm not going to show you that because it's kind of getting off topic. So back to this, we've got our machine. We're just going to do 30 gigabytes because we're actually not going to launch this machine. And then we just go review and launch. We check that we've selected everything that we want. Yep, I mean, some of that might not really make a huge amount of sense to you, and we're going to go launch. Now, we're making the assumption that we've done that, and this is how we access the machine. So back into our services console. So if we went back to, let's look to get here. If we went services, we can click on EC2. If we started from scratch, let's just do that for you. If you get a bit lost, back to the management console, select EC2. Here we go. Right, so here's all our machines, and you can see instances all state, instances running. I want to see the ones that are running. There we go. I've got AWS deployment 1 and AWS 2 installed, just so that I know that's the one that's got FME Server and Desktop installed and ready to go. Okay, and I can get rid of that as well. I can clear that filter so I can see all my machines. Right, so we want to connect now. So we've got our machine, we've gone in, we've specified the instance type, we specified the memory, etc., etc. We've hit run, it's up and running. A couple of things that we can look at here from a summary perspective that are worth noting. So actually see there, you can see your availability zones. So see all mines are 2C. Obviously, if you had one that's 2A and 2C, you might think, ah, that's a bit annoying. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, that's just food for thought. So this machine here is slightly different from the one that you did. I talked about IP address earlier on and assigning a public IP, sorry. So I'm just going to get this out of the way now. It's important. So how a machine is provisioned with AWS, when you create a machine, it pulls an IP address from a pool of IPs that are in Amazon, and it assigns it to that machine, and it initiates and it runs. And then you go in, you download, you install server, you configure up your host file, open up all your ports, and then you check it, you access it externally, and you've got access, great. The problem that you have is when you close that machine down, AWS releases that IP address back to the pool. And when you spin it back up, it pulls a new IP address, which is a problem because that does two things. This little guy here, when we actually, let's just show that. So if we go to connect, so hold that as a placeholder for a moment. I go to RDP. Let's just do that a bit slower so you can catch up there. Sorry. So here we go. AWS deployment. I want to connect to the machine. Connect. And I don't care about session manager. I want to click RDP client. Download remote desktop file. You see this here? See how that's got EC2-3.104.42.186? So that is the actual IP address, right? So you can imagine now if I download that and I go, oh, I've got my RDP already on my computer saved, and I close it down, and there goes the IP, it's gone. I've got a new one back, and I go to try and use the same RDP file. It has the wrong IP address associated with it. So I'll just hang. It won't even prompt you to connect. So it's a problem. There's two ways around to get around doing that. One, you can run the tool that I've done for you. They'll update the host file, and you just know that each time you have to go in, download the new RDP file, and then connect to it. And the other one is using what we call elastic IPs. So if we go into EC2 here, elastic IPs, you get 6 of them completely free, right? And you can see here, associated instance ID. So these are the instances that already have an elastic IP. Why? Because I get really sick of every time I have to close it down for whatever reason and bring it back up. I've got to mess around with those settings to make sure it's all working. So I just assign elastic IP, and it's perpetual until I remove it or I delete the machine. Okay, and it's really easy. So you'd go, let's have a look. One that's not assigned. This one's not assigned here. I know that it's not. And I go actions, and I go associate elastic IP. It'll ask me what the machine is, and I just assign it. Job done. But I've already done that. Okay, so let's get back to instances, and let's do the connection criteria. So we go into RDP, download the file. I've already done that. I want to get password. So here's another thing that might trip you up a wee bit. You can see there's a thing called a key pair. So when you first create an AWS instance or an AWS account, I actually can't quite remember which it is, but I'll actually prompt you to make a key pair because it'll recognize you don't have one. Okay, so once you've got that key pair, you need to keep it safe because every single machine that you build will require that key pair for the first time unless you define security groups. You configure your security groups with a password, which you can also do, and that's outside the breadth of what we're going to show today. But anyway, assuming that we're following the standard status quo, we go browse. I know where it is. It should just open it up into that location. You can see I've actually got 2. That's one for the company I run, and this is the locus one. I go open. Right, there's one more thing you need to do. So now we've got the key pair. We've loaded it in. We need to use this decrypt password. Here we go, and then we copy that, and then when we go to deploy it, so I don't want to do this because it's just going to shut me off, but I just double click and open that RDP, and I copy and paste that password in. You don't have to worry about user, it automatically populates all that for you, so nice and easy. Right, so recap, we've done our EC2, we've built our machine, we've got all the requirements there. Maybe we've assigned elastic IP. If you're going to do it right at the start. That way you're not changing all the configuration after the fact. And then we're going to connect to our machine. So we're going to use the password, use the key, connect into there, and this is the machine. So the first time you load it up, sometimes it takes a little bit long because it's running for the first time and it's setting up all the configuration files, etc. And when you're in here, there's one thing you're going to have to do, and you can't test anything because really there's nothing to test. You're going to have to install FME Server and FME Desktop. So in order to be able to do that, we're going to use Internet Explorer and we're going to download that. Now I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to show you what you need to do to make that easy, right? Because if I go into, let's say, do a search in FME Server download, what's this security prompt? Oh, another security prompt. Honestly, you get prompted for every security thing and you can't actually download anything because Internet Explorer is locked down. Really easy peasy to sort this problem. You just go server, type in that into the search file there, see server manager, which is desktop app. It would normally come up with dashboard, but because I've already been in it, I'm on where I should be. So when you open up, it will come on dashboard. You want to click local server and see over here, there's a little internet enhanced security configuration. So we want to click on that, and we don't care about users because we're the administrator. So we're going to hit off, OK, close this down, close this back down, open it back up. Remember and close it down because the settings don't take effect until you've reset it. And then we'll do FME Server download. Here we go, download the latest version. Look, I'm not getting prompted with any problems. I can select and download. Perfect, right? And that's all we need to do there, okay? So now the next machine we're gonna jump onto is one where we've downloaded desktop, we've installed it, we've downloaded server, we've done a standard deployment of FME server to port 80, all the normal default configurations, nothing's different. All right, so let's jump into that one. So here's our AWS machine. Right, so the first thing we probably want to do, we know we've got it installed. We're going to want to go to our REST endpoint and log in and configure FME server. Now, there's a couple of things to bear in mind here. On a local machine, the easiest way to get there is just type in localhost, right? If you type in localhost, it should prompt you with this REST login. Now, if that doesn't happen, it's possible that if your port 80 is closed and the way the AWS machine was configured or the security group that's applied, that might be stopping it, but it's probably more likely that the services haven't started properly, and there's a way to check. So if you go into open up your window here and you type in services, oops, services, wow, really my spelling's off today. And you see this desktop app, let's click on this, let's have a look. Right, so we don't care about half of this, we don't care about any of this stuff really except the FME stuff. So let's just have a look. So we've got, here's what we're after. So we've got FME server application server running, server core running, server database running, server engines running. Okay, so they're all running. So if they were all running and you couldn't access, I would do one more thing, and that would be go to your little windows here, go to FME server, and just I'd restart the FME server first, and then I wouldn't worry about it because hopefully what we're going to do from here on in would resolve the problem, and that's dealing with our advanced firewall settings. But just while we're on this window, I just want to point out something. See this here? So here, each one of these services, they're running under local system. Now, you have to be really careful if you're running an enterprise type deployment and you've got multiple users and they're running FME, or if FME needs to be able to access those user drives, it could be shared drives, network drives, and so on. Local system's not going to cut it because it needs permissions to those folders. So usually what the best way to deploy this is you would go into here and you go to properties and you go log on, and you'd have some kind of system account, like an administrative account that has access to all the network drives and folders associated with what FME needs to be able to access. It's a common problem actually where people find their workspace is suddenly not working and it gives like a really arbitrary error and they can't find what it is. So this is what you probably need to do. If you're running that type of deployment and folder access, you need to make sure it's managed properly. Again, I'm not really going to go into too many details, so we'll close that down. All right, so our REST is up and working. Let's just assume it's the best case scenario. We're going to log in. By the way, the first time you log in, it's admin, and assuming it's 2020 and onwards, it will prompt you to change your password the first time, then ask you to re-log in. I've obviously already done that. Here we go. I'm going to log in. Well, that's good news. I can get into my server machine, so that's a start. All right. Get rid of this little guy here. Okay, so look, I mean, we could do some testing now, right? So you might say, well, the first thing you should do is license your server. You might not be aware, but there's a lot of functionality that comes with FME server where it's not licensed, from version control to automations, being able to read your IMAP service, read emails, send emails, work with topics and notifications, all without a license. But obviously, a good practice would be we want to get our server licensed. Okay, so we go, first thing we do, you probably actually get prompted. There's a little pop-up thing that comes here first and says, we notice your server's not licensed. Do you want a license or do later? You select, yeah, I want a license. So we've got licenses and services, licensing, and then you just put request new license, or it might already just ask you for those details. Put your information in, and then what it'll do is it will go off, send a request to Safe Software. You'll get licensed, and that will give you 7 days. But then you'll send an email, so whatever email address you put in there will be sent out from Safe Software saying, hey, by the way, if you click this link, we'll give you 60 days of a trial license. You click on that link. Once you've clicked on it, then you hit refresh in here, and it'll update automatically so that you've got 60 days worth of license. Okay, again, pretty easy peasy stuff. Okay, so let's set a baseline now, right? So we've done a standard deployment, and we said earlier that really there's a whole host of testing that we want to do to make sure that before we go rolling this out, that it works properly. And so we're going to do a bit of a process here. So let's talk about some of the things we're going to do. Well, number one, I've got a little automation. Excuse me, sorry. I've got a little automation that's ready to go, and it's real simple. It's using Gmail IMAP service to read emails. It's going to monitor for a new email coming in. And why is that useful? Because we know that Gmail on IMAP runs on port 993, and if that's not open, it's not going to work, right? A common thing again when people are deploying, they don't realize those ports need to be open, or they don't have access to that. So we want to configure that. Anyway, so email comes in, and then what it does is it sets off a trigger, and there's two types of trigger. One is just going to send to a topic. It's a sample topic. We want to check that that's working, and we know that if the sample topic works, then port 7078, which is a WebSocket ports open, definitely need that one. And then the other one is SMTP, which I think for SMTP, it's port 465. And actually, there's a useful link here we'll give you in a second. But these things aren't going to work right now, right? So we know that, and we're going to do some testing with the tools that I've got. So if we go into AWS deployment, these are the tools that will package up for you, and it'll help you out a wee bit. So we've got configure all FME server ports. So they're all close just now, and I'm going to show you that. Generate a new host file. For those people that don't want to use an elastic IP, you can set up this generate host file so that it initiates on launch of every time of your machine logging on, and it will run this, and it'll update your host file so that your server will always work. Okay. And then the other one is a little simple one, right? Well, actually, we'll run this one first, right? It's 3:32 apparently. Obviously, this is on another time zone. So let's just have a wee look what this looks like. I mean, you can do all this with the command line. I just think it's much easier to have little tools so that you just click and run, click and run. But they're all very similar configurations. So we've got a creator, an attribute manager. If we go into the attribute manager, here's the command. So I know I've researched, I know that if I run this command in the command line, it's going to change the time on this. So I know we've got a system caller. So if we just run this, actually, let's close it down. Let's just run it from, because this is the idea, right? We're not going to open up the workspace to run it. We're just going to use the run quick translator. It's going to run it. Look, there we go. 11:33 a.m. on the 15th of 12th. Great. So now I have the correct time. Bear in mind, you'd have to change that, of course, if you were in Australia or somewhere else. So just remember that one. And we're going to close that. Next thing we want to do is, right, we know that we want to be able to have all these ports open so we can use our server properly. Let's do one test. So 13:55.239. Let's just check to see if this is working right now. I think I've got one here. So if I put this in, so if you just type that in like this, 239.222, here we go. And look, I know already it's not working. It's trying to find it. It can't access the machine. So another test just to show you that that's the case. So if we go to generate firewall info, what this is going to do is this is going to create like a little HTML file that's basically going to say what ports you've got open, or if you've got any open at all. So I've run that, open port. Now all ports are closed. Great. Okay, so we want to open up the ports. There's two ways to do that. We could go into advanced firewall settings, and we can go inbound rules, and we can go a new rule, and follow that process, open up each one of the ports, or you can go, oh, thanks, Darren, that was really good of you to put together something that opens up all the ports I actually need, and with a bit of flexibility. So we run this one, configure all FME server ports, run with FME Quick Translator, and there's some user parameters in here, so it's going to prompt me, and you can see there's actually two functions. So if you messed it up, you can hit delete and delete the ports, but we're just going to add them. We want port 80. If you did it to 8080, you'd obviously select 8080 instead of 80. No, do we want SMTP 25? In this instance, we don't need it. 587, yes, we want that. 465, yes, we want that. And look, it tells you what they're for. 993, yes, we want it. And 7078, which is the important one, yes, okay, let's run it. Okay, now let's rerun our generate firewall report. Let's run this guy. Let's see if it's updated. We'll open that up again. Here we go. Right, so here's all the ports that were open. I bet you now, if I go back to that URL that I put in, which is this machine, it should be there now. Look, it is. Boom. How about that? So that immediately that we opened up all the ports, and this is specific to port 80, right? We were able to access that. There is one little gotcha on this one. If that doesn't work in the security group, let's just show you that now. Just conscious of time as well. Let's just do this in the security group. So AWS deployment 2. This is important because if it doesn't work, there's one more thing you have to do. And let's find our security group. Launch Wizard 1. So security group, Launch Wizard 1, it'll tell you. And then I go into network and security groups. Launch Wizard 1, where are you? Here. There's one little line of something you need, actions, edit inbound rules. Right, this here, so see how it's HTTP, TCP, 80, custom. And this here, what this means is, and I'm not a security expert, but I can tell you now that's probably not a good thing, because that's saying any IP address can access this port, all right? So if I wanted to secure that down, maybe I just pick my laptop, my IP, so I can access this, nobody else can. But you need that line of code in there, because if I deleted that, it wouldn't work. So we're coming up to the very last test now. So we're gonna close that down, close that down. I don't know if you noticed there's links in there as well. Sorry, I should have shown you that. So just open that back up again. So see, I put some links in here. Here's a link to all the different ports that you need to configure. Some of them you have to research outside of that because you know you're using different emailers, email web domains, whatever the terminology is, apologies. And yeah, there was another one in there as well. Right, so we're pretty much good to go. Let's go and do our automation test now. So let's go into the machine and let's go have a look at our automation, manage automations. And I also want to, I'm going to log in twice on this machine. That way, oops, silly thing. Let's do this twice. And the reason I'm doing this twice is because I want to kill two birds, one stone. I want to be able to look at the topics so I can show you everything just works in one big go. Here we go. Let's go to, I want to check my topics are working, so I need to monitor them, right? So I need to go into automations, notifications classic, topic monitoring, and see I've got sample topic ready to go. All right, so what I'm expecting is I'm gonna send myself an email here. We are locus 1, and test 4. I mean, that doesn't really matter. All right, and what that's going to do is that's going to send an email to myself, which you can see, and then let's walk through what's going to happen with the automation. So if I go into here, that email is going to come in. It's going to activate this trigger from the IMAP service, which is listening every minute, so it'll be quite quick. It's going to send an email to my locus email address, and then it's going to send information to that topic. And once you've done that, you've got all of FME Server on AWS fully configured, and you know it's working, and you can be confident of that. And let's just see if that's come through yet. Okay, we'll wait for that to come through, and I'll get back to the slides. So that's pretty much it. That's how you go and configure AWS and get it all up and running. Hopefully that makes sense. Oh, here we go. Look, we just set IMAP success, so we know it's working. And I'm probably expecting if I pop back into this, Look at my top, there we go, look at that, so it's working. So I know all my ports, I know my FME server's working, I can use my email, topic, and notifications. So hopefully that was really useful for you. I'm just going to finish off now by covering off a couple of business cases. So if we go to, from current slide. All right, so a couple of business cases before we lead into Stuart. So a small organization, small organizations might not have the technical resources, or they certainly don't have the capital expenditure to go out and buy the infrastructure that they need, right? So, something like an AWS or Azure provides an operating expenditure and allows you to utilize the latest technology. It's robust, it's scalable, it's safe, it's flexible, and obviously offers that operating expenditure versus CapEx expenditure. Proof of concept, I think, is a really good one. Why? Because you look at certain organizations that are so locked down, trying to engage with your IT team to, get new software and to build proof of concepts, to get things up and running so that you can say, hey, look, this is why we need that. If you go to the cloud, you can work outside that and remove all those kind of restrictions, so you can build, replicate, demonstrate the power of FME and obviously the cloud to management. There's a famous saying, a picture says 1,000 words, but I think if you can show a real life working demo that's relatable to your organization, that says 1,000 more. And then lastly, AWS offers another level of control, right? From replication, backup, protection, security, and a whole host of other technology that you can have access to, like Internet of Things, machine learning, AI, different storage mechanisms, multiple machines, from simple machines right up to the real grunt, power-hungry machines that you need to process big data. So that's just some of, I think, the business case that hopefully relates to what you're looking for. And now I'm going to skip over to Stuart, who's going to take over and give you all the information you need to know on Azure. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Darren. That was fantastic. Okay. Yeah, great. So that was a really good in-depth review of how to deploy FME Server on AWS there. What I'm going to do now is give you a brief overview of your options for deploying FME Server on Azure. So my role at Safe is I oversee the cloud group at Safe Software. So I oversee FME Cloud and also the team that builds all of the connectors and integration endpoints for all of the main cloud platforms. So as Darren mentioned, this presentation, this section is going to be a little bit higher level. Rather than diving down and doing a really in-depth look at the kind of technical implementation, I'm going to kind of do a high-level review of what your options are if you're looking to deploy into Azure. So when you're deploying into any cloud platform with FME Server, the first decision point is, do you want a basic installation of FME Server? So this will be just like Darren did, single virtual machine with FME Server installed on it. Do you want that, or do you want a distributed installation of FME Server? Obviously, the basic installation on the single host is really nice and simple to deploy. As Darren showed, probably half an hour to get you up and running, but it's a single point of failure. So you might be able to not deliver quite as high level of uptime as a distributed deployment, but it's much easier to manage. It's really, really simple. And this is indeed, many of our customers run with this model. So we'll have a look at our options for deploying on Azure with a basic installation. And we'll also have a look at our options for a distributed installation. And so this is if you want to break out essentially the FME Server architecture into individual components and deploy the components onto different bits. So virtual machine group, we call them scale sets in Azure for the engines, one for the core, the database, the load balancer, the web servers. We split everything out into a fault tolerant and scalable deployment. So we'll have a look at the options for deploying in this model as well. So what are our options here for basic installation? So this is the same on AWS, the same on Google Cloud, the same on premises really, apart from maybe Docker, but you can just take the FME Server installer that you saw Darren use there, download it off the website, and you can install Windows or Linux on a VM on Azure, or you can use Docker Compose to deploy a basic kind of containerized version of FME Server. So this is one thing. I'm calling this a manual installation. Obviously, you need to go and you download the installer, run the installer. A new option that we've got that was out only a couple of months ago is a cloud marketplace listing. And so what this allows you to do is launch a pre-configured single virtual machine with server and desktop installed on it. So this is really, really good for doing proof of concepts or testing FME Server. If you just want to get going quickly with FME Server, and what this enables you to do, this is not a platform as a service or a managed service or anything like that. All it is think of it as like a cloud installer. Rather than you provisioning the virtual machine, running the installation, just like Darren did, you can go here and you can actually say, okay, which version of FME do you want? Actually, I'll step back a bit. If you go to the Azure Marketplace, you can search for FME in the Azure Marketplace, and then you'll find the FME platform in there. And the platform one is the single virtual machine, and this has desktop and server already pre-configured on it. The security is configured, the storage, everything's done for you. So literally all you need to do is click create, and you choose the virtual machine name, you choose the region you want it in. You can set the username and password for the virtual machine. Much like Darren was doing, you click launch, and then in a couple of minutes you have a virtual machine, but in this instance, FME Server is already installed for you. So this is going into your Azure account, not Safe Software's. It's deploying into your infrastructure. You're paying for all of the infrastructure, and you have to license FME Server exactly the same way as you would on premises, or as you saw Darren do earlier on. Okay, so that's a great small, medium-sized enterprise. You want to get going quickly with Server on Azure. You want to get up and running, proof of concept, or maybe even you want a nice simple deployment for your production because you're not too worried about uptime. You know, with these kind of deployments, you can still get over 99% uptime very, very easily. They're extremely stable, are the cloud services now. But if you're looking for that little bit extra, you're looking for that 99.99, or you're looking to be able to scale up specific parts of the infrastructure, then you can look to do a HA or distributed deployment of FME Server on Azure. So again, you've got the option of manual installation here, but much more complicated than what Darren just showed you on AWS there. And you can do this on AWS as well, or Google. And what you'd have to do in much the same way as you just saw, you'd have to launch individual virtual machines, you'd have to provision databases, you'd have to configure load balancers and things like that. So it's relatively complex to do this. It is all documented and it's all there, and we can support you in this, and it's completely fine if you want to do this. But just know it's a little bit more complicated than what Darren showed you. I'd probably typically say for someone that knows what they're doing, this can take a day, half a day to a day for someone who's experienced. Another option for deploying an HA installation of FME Server is Kubernetes. So you can deploy a containerized, Dockerized version of FME Server using Docker Compose, but the problem there is then you have all of these containers that are created, and there's no way to manage them, to do the security updates, to do the network interfaces, and it's complicated to run multiple apps in the same kind of area. So what Kubernetes gives you is it's an orchestration framework. So it lets you manage multiple apps, so FME Server alongside other apps in one cluster. So it's very, very powerful if you know what you're doing. You can deploy the Kubernetes deployment of FME Server, I would say in less than 15 minutes into Azure Kubernetes service, but it might be easy to deploy, but it's not trivial to look after and maintain, and it's complex is Kubernetes. So unless you know a lot about Kubernetes or you're using it in your organization, I would just think carefully before you go down this path. When we support customers here, a lot of them, the questions aren't, about FME Server, they're actually about Kubernetes, because it does get quite complicated quite quickly. But Azure Kubernetes service, you can deploy into that on Azure as well. Now, the other one, which I'll talk about in more detail, is our new cloud marketplace distributed deployment. And this lets you deploy a distributed Windows-based deployment of FME Server in a couple of clicks. So what does that look like? What's a distributed Windows-based deployment of FME Server? Again, I'll show you in a second. It's in the marketplace. You can find it and you can click launch. But what does that do? What does that look like? What are we giving you? Well, this is the architecture here, and you can see this in the slides that we'll send out. But what we're doing is we're provisioning a distributed FME server. So we've got the core here in one VM scale set with the FME server core job queue. We're provisioning the load balancers that you need. We're provisioning the databases, the storage, and the scale set for the engines as well. So this is essentially turning this infrastructure into a big piece of JSON code, and Safe Software are defining the infrastructure you need on AWS to support an FME server deployment. That essentially is what the marketplace deployment is. And so what you can do is you can go into the marketplace yourself. You can find the distributed deployment here. You can choose the build of FME server you want. You can click create. And so here now we can say we're loading into your Azure account here. It's not Safe Software's, it's going into your Azure account. So which resource group do you want? Which region do you want? You know, I'm going to do West US because it's near me. What's the name of the scale sets? How many machines do you want? Do you want 3 core machines or 2? Usually we have 2 core machines for fault tolerance. And then the engine part is the part we scale for if we want to scale out processing. So we can look at the virtual machine settings here. You know, I'm going to put my username and password in here. Here's the size of the machine here. So these are the size of the machines in each of the scale sets. That looks fine to me. Storage settings, we set up the Azure file storage for you. Network settings, we configure all the network settings for you, and we set up a public DNS so you can access the FME server publicly. And that's it. You review this, you create it, and then once you're ready to go, you can create here and it launches everything for you in a couple of minutes. What does that look like? Well, once you've launched it, this is a resource group with all of the components that we create. So you can see we've got the public IP address here, we've got the load balancers, the storage account, we've got the database for Postgres, and we've got the scale sets here as well for the core and engines. So let's have a look at the engine scale set here. We can see we've got 2 hosts running here, 2 virtual machines with engines on, and I can actually scale this up and down by just using this slider here. So I could add, say, 4 more hosts to this machine, click save, and Azure will automatically, oh no, I've got too many things in there, but if I had enough space in my region, let's try 3 to see if I've got that. Yeah, so I'll add 1 more host. Azure will bring that host up, and that host will automatically connect to FME Server once it's online, and you can start using the engines. You can see it's creating them here. You can also scale based on metrics, and you can also scale using their API, and we'll be talking more about that Safe Software over the coming months. Okay, so that's a really quick overview of all the options you've got there. One thing I do just want to touch on is FME Cloud an option for you potentially here? So what we've talked about here is with Darren and myself is deploying into your own Azure or AWS account. Well, in this situation, you're the one that has to look after everything. You have to manage the infrastructure. You have to patch the operating system. You have to configure alerts. You have to clear the logs up. So that's fantastic. Many organizations want that, but some organizations don't. And so for that, if you don't want that, have a look at FME Cloud. This is our managed deployment of FME Server, where Safe Software looks after the infrastructure side of things. So you just worry about your workspaces and FME Server. Now, many of you will say, oh, but if you know FME Cloud's hosted on AWS, so many of you will say, oh, but my data's on Google Cloud or my data's on Azure. Well, that's fine, and it can still be an option to use FME Cloud. There's two key considerations you need to think about when connecting FME Server in FME Cloud out to Google or Azure or even AWS, to be honest. One is performance and one is security. So on the security side of things, you know, it's everything's encrypted. So if you've got your data on Azure files or Azure storage or in a database, when you read and write that data across the network, it's encrypted. So unless you need a really high level of security like Active Directory integration or role-based access on the virtual machine, and you're a larger org, then the security might be actually good enough that we can provide. It's just like connecting to any API that's encrypted. And on the performance side of things, this used to be an issue, but I just read 50 gigabytes of data from an FME Cloud instance. So I downloaded 50 gigabytes of data, CSV file, onto the instance and then back up again to the storage service. And you can look here in the same geographical region, Azure actually outperformed AWS. So that was going from AWS on cloud to AWS to Azure and Google. And they're all similar. You know, the network speed between these clouds, the backbone it's so fast now. So again, unless you're moving terabytes of data, then FME Cloud might be an option for you. Okay, so there's a few articles here. I know we're running a bit late, so I won't go into these. They'll be in the web presentation that we send out. But yeah, let's connect back with Darren now and see if we've got any questions.
Yep. Hold on a second. Sorry, let's make sure I show the right screen. Here we go. Remembers it. Yep. So if anybody's got, thank you very much, Stuart. That was awesome, and even I learned some stuff there. It's yeah, I preferred working with AWS on the simple side of things, right? Just to show you how much there is to learn. So thanks a lot for that, Stuart. Much appreciated. So it looks like I don't think we have any questions. Maybe we'll just give it another few seconds. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap things up? Yeah, as Stuart said, we'll be supplying this presentation. We'll give everybody a link that will access to the presentation, the video, and also those tools that we built just to make things easy for you. And then, of course, as always, you can reach out to us, either myself or Stuart, and we're happy to support, answer any questions you've got. So, yeah, I think that's us. Thank you very much, Stuart, and thanks to the rest of the team for bringing this together. And thank you, everybody, for coming on and listening to our webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. That was fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now, everybody.
Bye.